Excuse me, I think you're in the wrong line. This is for priority boarding. The words cut through the air with practiced condescension. 15 minutes later, Diana Montgomery would be escorted off the aircraft in front of 200 passengers, her life forever changed. The air in Terminal B of JFK International hung heavy with the familiar cocktail of human hurry, the scent of burnt coffee from overcrowded cafes, the faint sweetness of cinnamon rolls, and the underlying metallic tang of recycled air. It was a symphony of chaos, a place where individual stories collided and separated every second. Announcement chimes punctuated conversations, and the squeaking of roller bags created an irregular rhythm against the polished floors. Jasmine Wilson, aged 21, was a calm island in this turbulent sea. With her noise-canceling headphones playing a low-key jazz trio and a textbook on advanced propulsion systems in her lap, she was a portrait of focused tranquility. Her braided hair fell in a neat pattern just below her shoulders, and her dark brown eyes scanned the pages with methodical precision. A silver Aerospace pin, a small, elegant wing design her father had given her when she was accepted to her engineering program, caught occasional glints of fluorescent light from her jacket lapel. She was flying to London for a semester abroad, a capstone to her aerospace engineering degree at MIT. Her professors had praised her exceptional understanding of fluid dynamics and her innovative approaches to fuel efficiency problems. This semester at Imperial College would put her in contact with some of the field's most respected researchers, an opportunity she had earned through relentless academic excellence, despite the occasional professor who seemed surprised by her aptitude. The flight Transatlantic Airways Flight A350 was a familiar one. Her father had been flying this route for over a decade, one of the airline's most prestigious captain assignments. For Jasmine, the rhythmic roar of a jet engine wasn't noise. It was a lullaby she'd known her entire life. Even as a child, she could identify aircraft by the specific pitch and cadence of their engines, a party trick that delighted her parents' colleagues at company picnics. Her boarding group, Priority Group 2, was called over the loudspeaker. The voice of the gate agent, Thomas, cut through the terminal's din. Now, boarding Transatlantic Airways Flight A350 to London Heathrow. Priority Group 2 passengers. Please have your boarding passes ready. Jasmine gracefully packed her book into her stylish but practical backpack, stood up, and stretched. She was dressed comfortably for the long-haul flight. Dark, high-quality joggers, a simple white t-shirt, and a lightweight gray jacket that complemented her warm brown skin. Her hair was styled in intricate shoulder-length braids, each one a testament to patience and artistry. As she approached the boarding lane, she noticed them. A couple who looked as if they'd stepped directly out of a luxury travel magazine. The woman, Diana Montgomery, probably in her late 50s, wore a cream-colored cashmere travel suit that likely cost more than Jasmine's entire semester's book budget. The price tag was still partially visible inside the sleeve, an oversight, or perhaps a deliberate choice to broadcast its value. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, her face a mask of bored superiority. Diamonds glittered at her ears and on her fingers, catching light with every practiced gesture. Just moments before Jasmine had observed Diana helping an elderly gentleman with his carry-on, her smile warm and genuine as she lifted it into the overhead compartment check area. The brief moment of kindness made the woman's subsequent behavior all the more jarring. The man beside her, Richard Montgomery, was older perhaps in his early 60s, with a soft, doughy face and a perpetually apologetic expression, as if he was constantly sorry for the space his wife took up in the world. His charcoal suit was expensive but conservative, his silver hair neatly combed, his eyes darting nervously from his wife to the other passengers and back again. Occasionally, he would check his watch and mutter something about the London meeting, his forehead creasing with worry. Jasmine took her place in line behind a family with 2 young children, leaving a polite amount of space. Diana, however, seemed to perceive Jasmine's very existence as an inconvenience. She sidled up next to her, her expensive perfume a cloying invasion of Jasmine's personal space. "Excuse me," Diana said again, her voice dripping with condescension. "I think you might be in the wrong line. This is for priority boarding." She didn't look at Jasmine directly, instead examining a stray scuff on her own designer carry-on. Jasmine pulled down her headphones, letting them rest around her neck. "I know," she replied, her voice even and calm. "I'm in Group 2. She held up her boarding pass, the bold Group 2 clearly visible. Diana gave the pass a cursory, dismissive glance. "Really? How fortunate for you. They must be letting almost anyone into these groups now." The insult was subtle, a verbal sliver of glass designed to draw blood without leaving a visible wound. Jasmine had been on the receiving end of comments like this her whole life. The surprise that a young black woman could be in a priority line, could be studying a complex scientific field, could simply exist in a space they felt belonged to them. "It's based on the ticket you purchase," Jasmine said, simply refusing to take the bait. She turned her attention back toward the gate, but Diana wasn't finished. She nudged Richard. "Can you believe this, Richard? The standards are just slipping everywhere." Richard mumbled something incoherent, his eyes darting around, desperate to avoid any form of confrontation. But for a brief moment, his eyes met Jasmine's, and she saw something there, a flicker of apology, perhaps even shame. Jasmine felt a familiar heat rising in her chest, a mixture of anger and the exhausting weight of having to maintain composure yet again. A small, vindictive voice inside her whispered how satisfying it would be to put this woman in her place with a cutting remark. She pushed the thought away, not wanting to become what she despised. The line began to move. As Jasmine stepped forward, Diana pushed her oversized tote bag, slightly making Jasmine stumble. It was a small, petty act of aggression, but it was unmistakably intentional. "Watch where you're going," Diana snapped, as if Jasmine were the one at fault. Jasmine stopped and turned to face her fully. The jazz in her ears was gone, replaced by a low thrum of adrenaline. "You just pushed your bag into me. I did no such thing," Diana scoffed, her voice rising in volume, attracting the attention of those nearby. "You're being clumsy, probably overwhelmed by the whole experience." Jasmine's mind flashed back to her sophomore year when a professor had suggested she might be overwhelmed by the advanced aerodynamics course right before she received the highest grade in the class. The assumption of inadequacy was a familiar burden. "I'm not overwhelmed," Jasmine stated, her voice now carrying a chill of its own. "I'm just trying to board my flight. The same as you." "Hardly the same," Diana muttered, just loud enough for Jasmine and a few others to hear. She gestured vaguely at Jasmine's attire. "My ticket gives me certain privileges. It ensures a certain caliber of fellow passenger." Her eyes raked over Jasmine dismissively. Or at least it's supposed to. The gate agent Thomas looked over, his expression one of pure exhaustion. He just wanted the plane boarded and pushed back on time. "Folks, let's keep the line moving. Please scan your pass and move on to the jet bridge." Jasmine presented her pass. It beeped green. Thomas nodded her through without a word. As she stepped away, she heard Diana say to Thomas, loud enough for it to be a pronouncement, "You should really be more careful about who you let through. She clearly doesn't belong." Thomas just sighed and gestured for Diana's boarding pass. "Boarding pass, ma'am." Jasmine walked on to the jet bridge, the sterile corridor that served as the final gateway between the chaos of the terminal and the ordered world of the aircraft. She took a deep breath, trying to release the anger and frustration that had coiled in her stomach. Her hands trembled slightly, and she felt the uncomfortable prickle of sweat at the back of her neck despite the chill of the air conditioning. It was just one ignorant woman. 7 hours in the air and she'd never have to see her again. She was wrong. The confrontation wasn't over. It was just getting started. The jet bridge was a narrow, windowless tube amplifying the sense of confinement. The rolling clicks of carry-on wheels echoed off the corrugated metal walls. Jasmine kept a steady pace, wanting to put as much distance as possible between herself and Diana Montgomery. She found her rhythm focusing on the patch of industrial carpet ahead of her, but the click-clack of expensive heels grew louder closer. Diana, having breezed through the gate check, was now practically on Jasmine's heels, Richard trailing behind like a remorseful shadow. "You know?" Diana's voice cut through the air, sharp and intrusive. "Some people have no sense of pace. They just dawdle along, holding everyone else up." Jasmine ignored her, her jaw tightening. She could feel the stares of other passengers, a mix of curiosity, pity, and discomfort. No one said anything. No one ever did. It was easier to look away to pretend you didn't hear the venom in a stranger's voice. A young white man in his 30s glanced between Diana and Jasmine, opening his mouth as if to intervene, then seemingly thought better of it and looked down at his phone. His silence stung almost as much as Diana's words. As the line bottlenecked near the aircraft door, they were forced into close proximity. Jasmine's backpack was now just inches from Diana's cashmere suit. "Would you mind?" Diana hissed, shoving Jasmine forward. The push was harder this time, more deliberate. Jasmine stumbled again, her hand flying out to brace herself against the wall of the jet bridge. Her headphones slipped from her neck, clattering onto the floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her palms suddenly slick with sweat. That was the line. Jasmine turned her eyes, blazing with a fire that surprised even herself. "Do not push me again," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Diana's face twisted into a mask of theatrical outrage. "How dare you speak to me like that? I barely touched you. You are an aggressive young woman, aren't you? I am a passenger on this flight, who you have verbally and now physically assaulted twice." Jasmine countered, her voice resonating with the precision of an engineer defining a problem. "Assaulted?" Diana laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's what your people always do, isn't it? Play the victim. I'll be reporting your threatening behavior to the cabin crew." The words "your people" hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The subtext was now text. The prejudice was no longer veiled. Richard Montgomery finally seemed to find a sliver of courage. "Diana, please," he whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "Let's just get to our seats. Don't you—" "Diana, please me, Richard," she snapped, rounding on him. "I will not be accosted in a glorified hallway by someone who probably has a forged ticket." At the aircraft door, the lead flight attendant, a woman named Sophia Ramirez, with kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor, saw the commotion. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Yes, there is," Diana announced, stepping forward and pointing a perfectly manicured finger at Jasmine. "This woman was threatening me and I want to see her boarding pass. I highly doubt it's valid for this cabin." Sophia looked from Diana's furious face to Jasmine's controlled anger. She was a veteran of the skies, and she knew this type of passenger all too well. Her primary goal was de-escalation. A delay on the ground cost the airline thousands of dollars per minute. "Ma'am, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," Sophia said, directing her words to Diana. "Let's get you to your seat. You're in 1A, I believe. It's just to your left." "I'm not going anywhere until I'm assured that my safety isn't at risk," Diana insisted. "I want her removed from this flight." Jasmine felt a surge of disbelief. Removed. For being pushed and insulted. She looked at Sophia, her eyes pleading for reason. "That's not what happened. This woman has been harassing me since the gate." Sophia's professional smile was strained. Her eyes flicked briefly to Jasmine's face, then back to Diana's, making a rapid calculation about which passenger posed the greater threat to an on-time departure. "Let's everyone just take a deep breath. We can sort this out once we're all seated. We need to get the aisle clear." She looked at Jasmine. "Ma'am, what is your seat number 15C?" Jasmine replied, her voice tight. "Premium economy." Diana let out another derisive snort. Premium economy, of course. The implication was clear. Not quite first class, not quite good enough. "All right," Sophia said, making a decision. "You please head to your seat 15C and Mrs. Montgomery, I'll escort you to 1A. It was a dismissal, a classic move to separate the parties and diffuse the tension. But to Jasmine, it felt like a defeat. She was being sent away while the aggressor was being coddled and escorted. Jasmine bent down to retrieve her headphones, noticing a small crack in the plastic where they had hit the floor. Another small injury to add to the mounting indignities. Her throat tightened with emotion, not just anger, but the bitter taste of injustice that was all too familiar. She picked up her headphones, checked them for damage, and with one last lingering look at Diana's smug, triumphant face, she turned and walked down the aisle. Each step felt heavy. She was aware of the eyes on her back, the whispers that followed in her wake. She found her seat an aisle seat in the first row of the premium economy cabin and sank into it, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and humiliation. She stowed her backpack in the overhead bin and buckled her seatbelt, the click of the buckle sounding unnervingly final. She watched as Diana was personally seated by Sophia, fussing over her bag, demanding a pre-departure glass of champagne, and generally behaving as if she owned the aircraft. A middle-aged man in a business suit took the window seat beside her. He gave her a brief, polite nod, but seemed absorbed in his own pre-flight routine, flipping through emails on his phone. Jasmine was grateful for his disinterest. She didn't want conversation, she wanted justice. "These people think they're untouchable," muttered an older Hispanic woman across the aisle, catching Jasmine's eye with a knowing look. "But karma has a way of catching up." Jasmine nodded in silent gratitude for the small gesture of solidarity, but the comfort was fleeting. The injustice of it all burned in Jasmine's chest. She wasn't a victim. She was the daughter of a man who had dedicated 30 years of his life to this airline. A man who respected the rules of the sky above all else. And she would not let this stand. Diana's voice carried from the first-class cabin loud and performatively distressed. "I just don't feel safe with that girl on the flight. She was so aggressive." Another flight attendant, a young man named Alex, passed by with a concerned glance at Jasmine. She could read the question in his eyes. Was she the aggressive passenger causing trouble? The label had already stuck. The narrative was being written without her input. Jasmine felt a familiar sensation, that peculiar mix of anger, resignation, and determination that came with being prejudged. She'd felt it in classrooms when professors expressed surprise at her mathematical aptitude. She'd felt it in stores when security guards followed her, but not her white friends. She'd felt it in labs when peers assumed she was the assistant rather than the lead researcher. A part of her wondered if she should just let it go. Was calling her father an abuse of privilege? Would she be stooping to Diana's level by leveraging her connection? The thought made her hesitate, her finger hovering over her father's name in her contacts. No, this wasn't about privilege. This was about dignity, about standing up to behavior that should never be tolerated regardless of who you were or who you knew. She pulled out her phone. The cabin door was still open. The jet bridge was still attached. She still had a signal. She scrolled through her contacts and found the one labeled Dad. She pressed the call button, her heart pounding a steady, defiant rhythm against her ribs. The phone rang twice before he picked up. The voice on the other end was calm, deep, and utterly familiar. It was the voice that had read her bedtime stories. The voice that had explained the physics of lift, and the voice that had always, without fail, made her feel safe. "Jazz Bear. Everything okay? I thought you'd be boarding by now." "We are." "I'm on board," Jasmine said, keeping her own voice low, conscious of the passenger in the window seat next to her. "But Dad, there's a situation. A situation." "What kind of situation? Is there a problem with your seat? Did the upgrade clear?" "The seat is fine," Jasmine explained, choosing her words carefully. The engineer in her wanted to report the facts without emotional hyperbole. "It's a passenger, a woman in first class. She's been difficult." "Difficult how?" Her father's tone sharpened slightly. "She was verbally abusive at the gate and on the jet bridge. She pushed me. Twice." Jasmine's voice caught slightly. Then she accused me of threatening her and demanded the flight attendant remove me from the flight. There was a silence on the other end of the line, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was a weighted pause, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. Jasmine could picture her father's face perfectly, the way his brow would furrow, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Tell me her name and seat number," he said finally. His voice had changed. The paternal warmth was gone, replaced by something else. It was the voice he used when communicating with air traffic control through a storm, a tone of absolute command and zero ambiguity. "Her name is Montgomery, Diana Montgomery. She's in 1A, Jasmine reported. The lead flight attendant, Sophia, just separated us. Sophia Ramirez. Good. She's one of the best." He said the comment almost a thought to himself. "Okay, Jazz, stay in your seat. Don't engage with this woman any further." "Do you understand?" "Yes, Dad." "I'll handle it." "What are you going to do?" Jasmine asked, a sliver of apprehension creeping in. "My job?" he replied, and the line went dead. Jasmine stared at her phone for a moment before tucking it back into her pocket. A strange sense of calm washed over her. She had passed the problem to a higher authority, the highest authority on this aircraft. Up in first class, Diana Montgomery was sipping her champagne, regaling her meek husband with a triumphant, embellished version of the events. "And I told the flight attendant, you simply must do something. The safety of your premium passengers is paramount." Suddenly, the cabin speakers crackled to life. It wasn't the usual pre-recorded welcome message. It was a live voice, clear and resonant, filling the entire aircraft with effortless authority. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking from the flight deck." Jasmine felt a small smile touch her lips. She recognized that cadence, that deep baritone, better than her own heartbeat. "We'll be pushing back from the gate in just a few minutes' time," the voice continued. "Flight time to London Heathrow will be approximately 7 hours and 15 minutes. Cabin crew, please prepare the cabin for departure, and would the lead flight attendant, Sophia, please come to the flight deck immediately." There was a subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere. The request was unusual. The captain's direct public summons of a specific crew member before pushback was not part of the standard script. Sophia, who had been in the galley, appeared, her expression a mixture of professionalism and curiosity. She gave a brief, reassuring smile to a nearby passenger and walked briskly to the front of the plane, disappearing behind the cockpit door. Diana paused with her champagne flute halfway to her lips, a look of mild annoyance on her face. "Always some drama," she muttered to Richard. "Probably a mechanical issue. We'll be stuck here for hours." She had no idea how right she was about the drama, and how wrong about its nature. Inside the cockpit, the scene was one of calm focus. The first officer, James Rodriguez, was running through the pre-flight checklist. Captain Michael Wilson stood, having removed his headset. He looked at Sophia, his expression unreadable. "Sophia," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I need a report. There was a disturbance during boarding involving a passenger in 1A and another in 15C. Tell me exactly what you saw and heard." Sophia, a consummate professional, was taken aback but didn't show it. She recounted the events on the jet bridge accurately and dispassionately. "A verbal altercation. Captain. The passenger in 1A, a Ms. Montgomery, accused the passenger in 15C of being threatening and demanded she be removed. Ms. Montgomery alleged she was pushed. And did you see a push?" Captain Wilson asked, his eyes boring into hers. "No, sir. By the time I got there, it was just a loud verbal exchange. I made the decision to separate them to ensure an on-time departure." "And the passenger in 15C, what was her account?" She said Ms. Montgomery had been harassing her and had pushed her. Sophia admitted. To be honest, Captain Ms. Montgomery was being very loud and demanding. The younger woman seemed distressed but controlled. Sophia hesitated, then added, "If I may speak frankly, sir, I've seen this pattern before. The first-class passenger assuming privilege extends beyond the seat assignment." but our primary goal is on-time departure. I didn't have time to investigate properly. Michael nodded slowly, his expression softening slightly at her honesty. Thank you, Sophia. That's a clear report. I'll be coming out to speak with the passengers involved. Sophia's eyes widened slightly. Captain, are you sure we can handle it? She glanced at her watch. We're already running 10 minutes behind schedule. It was highly irregular for the captain to get involved in a passenger dispute unless it was a major security issue. I'm sure he set his tone, leaving no room for argument. This plane doesn't move until I'm satisfied that my crew and every single one of my passengers are safe and respected. That includes the passenger in 15C. Of course, Sophia replied, professionally concealing her surprise. Should I accompany you? No, I'll handle this myself. Continue preparing for departure. Michael touched a photo tucked beside his instruments, a family picture of his wife Jasmine and himself at her high school graduation. It was his ritual before every flight, a moment to remember what mattered most. Today, it carried extra weight. He straightened his tie and squared his shoulders. The man who emerged from the cockpit was the picture of command. 4 gold stripes adorned each shoulder of his perfectly pressed navy blazer. His posture was ramrod straight, and his face, which shared Jasmine's warm brown skin tone and thoughtful eyes, was etched with the calm confidence of a man who had safely landed multi-ton aircraft in zero visibility. First Officer Rodriguez watched his captain leave, sensing there was more to this situation than he knew. But he trusted Wilson implicitly. In 5 years of flying together, he had never seen the man make a rash decision. In the cabin, Michael's appearance caused a stir. It was unusual for the captain to emerge before takeoff, and his purposeful stride down the aisle commanded attention. Conversations quieted. Eyes followed his progress. He walked past the galley and into the first-class cabin. Diana Montgomery, who had been complaining about the temperature, looked up, a sycophantic smile instantly appearing on her face. "Oh, Captain, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice oozing charm. "I do hope my little complaint about that unruly girl hasn't caused a delay." Captain Wilson didn't smile. He looked down at her, his expression cold and professional. He then turned his gaze toward the main cabin, his eyes scanning the seat numbers until they rested on 15C. He saw his daughter looking back at him with a mixture of relief and apprehension. His gaze then returned to Diana. "Ms. Montgomery," he said, his powerful voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more intimidating than a shout. "We need to have a conversation, but first I need to check on one of my passengers." He turned his back on her stunned, sputtering face and began the long, deliberate walk down the aisle toward seat 15C. Every passenger in the front half of the plane watched a silent, captive audience to a drama they didn't yet understand. The air crackled with anticipation. The walk from the first-class curtain to row 15 felt to Jasmine like an eternity. The quiet hum of the auxiliary power unit seemed to fade into a ringing silence, punctuated only by the sound of her father's polished black shoes on the cabin floor. Heads turned. Conversations died. People lowered their books and tablets, their eyes tracking the uniformed figure of authority moving with such deliberate purpose. A woman in row 12 whispered to her companion, "What's happening? Why is the captain out here?" "No idea," her seatmate replied. "But something's up. They never come out before takeoff." Captain Wilson stopped beside Jasmine's seat. He didn't look at her immediately. Instead, he addressed the man in the window seat, a businessman who had been trying his best to become invisible. "Sir, my apologies for the interruption. My name is Captain Wilson. Would you mind if I have a brief word with this passenger?" The man flustered, just nodded. "Of course, Captain, no problem." Michael then turned his full attention to Jasmine. He looked at her not as a father looks at his daughter, but as a captain looks at a passenger in his care. It was a professional courtesy, a way of establishing the context for everyone watching. "Ma'am," he began, his voice formal, but with an undercurrent of warmth only she could detect. "I was informed there was an incident during boarding. I need to know from your perspective, are you feeling safe and comfortable to fly with us today? Jasmine met his gaze. I was harassed and physically pushed by the passenger in seat 1A. She said, her voice clear and steady, betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. I do not feel comfortable with her behavior, but I am not a threat to this flight. Michael gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. He had what he needed, her official testimony given in front of a witness. Thank you for your candor. Please remain seated. He then turned and walked back toward the front of the plane, the weight of his authority trailing behind him like a cape. He stopped, not at Diana's seat, but in the aisle just ahead of her row, positioning himself so he could address both her and her husband. He also had a clear view of Sophia, who stood observing from the galley. In the quiet of the cabin, a young woman 3 rows behind Jasmine whispered to her companion, "Wait. Did the captain just personally come out to check on a passenger complaint? Is that normal?" Her friend shook her head. Never seen that before. Something's up. Throughout the aircraft, phones were discreetly raised. Luis Hernandez, a travel journalist seated in 3B, had already begun recording. His instinct told him this was going to be a moment worth documenting. Captain Wilson stood perfectly still, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the forward cabin. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of his position and his absolute authority over this aircraft. "Ms. Diana Montgomery," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the silent cabin, each word perfectly enunciated. "I have now spoken to all parties involved, including the cabin crew who witnessed the end of your altercation." Diana, who had been momentarily speechless at the sight of the captain walking down the aisle to speak with Jasmine, had now recovered her bluster. She saw this as an opportunity to cement her status as the victim. "Well, thank you, Captain," she began, adopting a tone of beleaguered reasonableness. "I'm glad you're taking this seriously." That girl was incredibly aggressive. "I was simply trying to—" "Ma'am," Captain Wilson interrupted, holding up a hand. The simple gesture immediately silenced her. "Let me be perfectly clear about what is going to happen now. My lead flight attendant reported that you demanded another passenger be removed from this flight after accusing her of threatening behavior." "Yes, exactly. She was." He continued, speaking over her as if she hadn't made a sound. "My first responsibility is the safety and security of this flight. That responsibility extends to every single soul on this aircraft, from the person in seat 42E to the person in 1A. It also includes the well-being of my crew." He paused, letting his words sink in. He made eye contact with Richard, who seemed to shrink under the weight of the captain's gaze. Harassment, intimidation, and physical contact between passengers create a hostile and unpredictable environment. It is a direct threat to the safety of the flight, as it can escalate at any time. Transatlantic Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for such behavior. But she was the one Diana tried again, her voice becoming shrill. "I have an eyewitness account from another passenger who saw you initiate physical contact on the jet bridge," Michael said flatly. He had discreetly caught the eye of a man in row 3 who had been watching the entire affair on the jet bridge, and had given a confirming nod when Michael had looked his way. "I have my flight attendant's report of your aggressive demands, and I have the testimony of the passenger you harassed." He took a step closer. "You created a disturbance. You made baseless inflammatory accusations, and you physically assaulted another passenger. According to federal aviation regulations and our own airline's conditions of carriage, which you agreed to when you purchased your ticket, I have the absolute authority to refuse transport to any individual I deem a risk to the aircraft." Diana's face, which had been flushed with anger, was now draining of all color. The reality of her situation was beginning to dawn on her, cutting through the thick fog of her entitlement. You can't be serious," she stammered. "I'm a first-class passenger. I'm a member of the Chairman's Elite Club. I have flown millions of miles with this airline. Captain Wilson's expression didn't change. It was as if she were listing ingredients for a recipe he had no interest in. Your frequent flyer status is not a shield against common decency, Ms. Montgomery. It does not purchase you the right to abuse other passengers. On this aircraft, there are no elite clubs. There are only passengers and crew, and I am responsible for all of them. From further back in the cabin, a middle-aged man in a business suit called out, "Actually, Captain, I think you're overreacting." It was just a typical boarding squabble. We're already late. Let's just get going. Captain Wilson turned slightly, his gaze level. Sir, with respect, I make these decisions based on full information, not partial observations. And this aircraft operates on my schedule, not yours. The man fell silent, chastened. A few seats away, another passenger muttered, "Typical. One person causes trouble, and we all suffer." These dissenting voices made Michael hesitate, but only for a moment. He knew that safety, both physical and psychological, was non-negotiable. He turned slightly to include Richard in his address. "Sir, I am deplaning your party." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. A collective, quiet gasp rippled through the first-class cabin. "Us," Richard squeaked, his voice cracking. "But our meeting in London, my firm. You should perhaps have considered the consequences of your wife's behavior before it reached this point," the captain replied, his voice devoid of sympathy. He then looked at Sophia. "Sophia, please inform the gate agent that we have 2 passengers who will be disembarking. Have security meet them on the jet bridge to escort them back to the terminal." "No!" Diana shrieked, the last vestiges of her composure shattering. "You can't do this. I will sue you. I will sue this airline. I will have your job." "Do you have any idea who I am?" Captain Michael Wilson looked down at the hysterical woman in seat 1A. For the first time, he allowed a flicker of personal feeling to cross his face. It was a look of profound disappointment and pity. "Yes, Ms. Montgomery, I do know who you are. You're a passenger who has just been removed from my flight." He paused, then delivered the final devastating blow. "And as for having my job, you might find that more difficult than you imagine. You see, the young woman you harassed and assaulted the aerospace engineering student in seat 15C is my daughter." The silence that followed Captain Wilson's revelation was absolute. It was a dense, heavy quiet filled with the unspoken shock and dawning comprehension of every passenger who had heard it. The entire narrative of the conflict had been flipped on its head in a single sentence. This wasn't just a captain enforcing a rule. It was a father defending his child. For 5 full seconds, not a sound could be heard except the gentle hum of the engines. It was as if time itself had paused to acknowledge the gravity of what had just occurred. Diana Montgomery's face went through a rapid theatrical series of emotions. First, utter disbelief, her mouth hanging open. Then a flash of panicked calculation as she replayed every condescending remark, every shove, every venomous insult now cast in the horrifying light of this new reality. Finally, her expression settled on a sickly pale white of pure, unadulterated horror. She looked from the captain's unyielding face to the aisle where Jasmine sat, as if seeing the young woman for the first time, not as an obstacle, but as the source of her impending doom. Richard Montgomery looked as if he might faint. He sank back into his luxurious leather seat, his face ashen, mumbling, "Oh, no. Diana, what have you done?" Throughout the cabin, phones were raised higher, capturing the moment. A collective gasp rippled through the passengers, followed by a buzz of whispered conversations. Several passengers reached for their devices, the moment too powerful not to document. "Did you hear that? The captain's daughter? That woman is so screwed." The spell was broken by the quiet efficiency of the cabin crew. Sophia, her face a perfect mask of professionalism, nodded to the captain. "Right away, Captain." She picked up the interphone to call the gate. Another flight attendant appeared as if from nowhere, ready to assist. Ms. Montgomery, sir. The new flight attendant said, her voice soft but firm. If you would please gather your personal belongings. Diana was frozen, locked in a state of catatonic shock. But Richard, jolted into action by the sheer terror of the situation, began frantically fumbling with their overhead luggage. He pulled down a designer rollerboard and Diana's oversized tote, his movements clumsy and panicked. There must be a misunderstanding. Richard pleaded, his voice thin and reedy, directed at the captain's back as he began to walk toward the cockpit. My wife, she's very stressed. We can apologize. We will apologize profusely. Captain Wilson paused at the cockpit door but didn't turn around. The time for apologies has passed, sir. You had ample opportunity to correct your wife's behavior at the gate and on the jet bridge. Your silence was a form of complicity. Now please disembark my aircraft before you cause any further delay. He stepped into the cockpit, the door clicking shut behind him, a sound of absolute finality. Not everyone in the cabin was satisfied with this outcome. A woman in her 40s with a sharp bob and expensive jewelry leaned forward. This is ridiculous, she said loudly. Clearly, he's abusing his power to protect his daughter. I'm reporting this to the airline. From across the aisle, an older man in a rumpled suit countered. I saw what happened on the jet bridge. That woman, he pointed at Diana, deliberately pushed the young lady. Twice. The captain is completely within his rights. The cabin was suddenly divided with whispered debates breaking out among passengers. Some were supportive of the captain's decision, nodding in agreement. Others seemed concerned about the delay or the perceived use of authority. The walk of shame for the Montgomerys began. 2 uniformed airport security officers were now waiting at the open door of the aircraft, their presence lending a grim official air to the proceedings. The flight attendant gestured for Diana to move. Slowly, as if in a trance, Diana stood up. Her cashmere suit now looked crumpled and absurd. The diamonds at her ears seemed to mock her. She wouldn't look at anyone, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor as she shuffled into the aisle. Richard followed his head, bowed, dragging their bags behind him. Every eye in the first class and premium economy cabins was on them. There were no jeers, no applause, just a thick, damning silence. It was the quiet, collective judgment of dozens of strangers, a far more punishing sentence than any shouted insult. As they passed row 15, Diana risked a glance at Jasmine. Jasmine met her gaze not with triumph or malice, but with a simple, steady look of quiet dignity. It was the look of someone who hadn't asked for this fight but had finished it. In that moment, Diana saw not the unruly girl she had invented, but a poised, intelligent young woman who was everything she was not. It was perhaps the most humiliating part of the entire ordeal. Diana started, but the words caught in her throat. What could she possibly say? Now Diana stumbled, a small, choked sob escaping her lips before she caught herself. She hurried past her face burning with shame and practically fled onto the jet bridge into the custody of the waiting officers. Richard scurried after her, a man utterly defeated. As the aircraft door was closed and sealed, a palpable sense of relief spread through the cabin. The tension that had held everyone captive for the past 20 minutes dissipated, replaced by a low murmur of conversation. People exchanged looks, shaking their heads in disbelief. The man in the window seat next to Jasmine finally turned to her. "I am so sorry you had to go through that," he said, his voice full of genuine sympathy. "You handled yourself with incredible grace." "Thank you," Jasmine said, a real warm smile finally reaching her face. From across the aisle, an elderly woman caught Jasmine's eye and gave her a small, approving nod. Without a word, she reached over and briefly squeezed Jasmine's hand, a silent gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. But not everyone was supportive. A couple seated 2 rows behind Jasmine was deep in conversation, occasionally glancing her way with obvious disapproval. Completely unnecessary delay, Jasmine overheard the woman saying. And using his position like that. Jasmine felt her cheeks flush. Had her father gone too far? Was she responsible for this growing discord? A few minutes later, the engines began to whine and the plane pushed back from the gate. Sophia came by Jasmine's seat. On behalf of the entire crew, I want to formally apologize for what you experienced, Miss Wilson, she said sincerely. That should never have happened. It wasn't your fault, Sophia. You were just trying to do your job, Jasmine replied. Maybe Sophia said, hesitating slightly. But sometimes doing the job means challenging behavior that isn't acceptable, not just separating people to keep the peace. Your father reminded me of that today. Her expression grew more serious. Though I should tell you, not everyone agrees with his decision. There's been some discussion among the passengers, the captain's daughter Sophia said with a small knowing smile. He must be incredibly proud of you. You have his composure. As the plane taxied toward the runway, the PA system crackled to life again. Folks, this is your captain again. Apologies for the slight delay. We had to resolve a security matter. We are now cleared for takeoff. Cabin crew, please take your seats for departure. The voice was the same as before, calm, professional, authoritative. But now every single passenger on that flight heard it differently. They weren't just listening to a pilot. They were listening to Captain Michael Wilson, a man who protected his flight, his crew, and his family, all with the same unwavering resolve. Luis Hernandez in seat 3B discreetly saved the video he had recorded and began composing notes on his phone. His travel blog, The Global Observer, usually focused on luxury destinations and airline reviews. But today's post would be different. He already had the title in mind, Justice at 35,000 feet, when entitlement meets authority. As the plane accelerated down the runway and lifted gracefully into the sky, Jasmine leaned her head back against the seat, feeling the powerful, familiar rumble. She was safe. She was on her way. And for Diana Montgomery, the consequences she suspected were only just beginning. Jasmine's mind raced with conflicting emotions. Relief, yes, but also worry. Had she done the right thing by calling her father? Would there be blowback for him professionally? Her stomach knotted as she recalled the disapproving whispers of some passengers. The price of justice sometimes came with unexpected costs. The 7-hour flight to London passed in a state of surreal peace. Once they reached cruising altitude, Captain Wilson briefly emerged from the cockpit. He walked directly to Jasmine's seat this time with a warm, open smile that was purely paternal. He leaned down, gave her a brief hug, and spoke just loud enough for her to hear over the drone of the engines. You okay, Jazz Bear? I'm okay, Dad. Thank you. She paused, then added more quietly, but I heard some passengers complaining. Will you get in trouble for this? A shadow of concern crossed his face. Don't worry about that. I did what any captain would do. Maintained order and safety on my aircraft. I was just so angry, she admitted, her voice catching. She made me feel so small. But I didn't want to drag you into this. I almost didn't call. Nobody gets to make my daughter feel small, he said, his hand briefly squeezing her shoulder. The strength and certainty in his touch spoke volumes. You did nothing wrong. You were composed, you were clear, and you stood up for yourself. I've never been more proud of you. He looked at her, his eyes shining. Now get some rest. I'll see you in London. Dad? She called softly as he turned to leave. Is it always like this? Having to be twice as controlled, twice as composed, just to be treated with basic respect? Her father's face softened with understanding. Too often, yes. But remember this, your dignity isn't determined by how others treat you. It's in how you carry yourself through it all. And you carried yourself beautifully today. He gave her a wink and returned to the flight deck, the quiet hero of Flight A350. The rest of the journey was uneventful, but there was a noticeable shift in how the crew and other passengers treated Jasmine. It wasn't deference exactly. It was respect, a simple acknowledgement of her dignity which had been so unfairly challenged. Sophia made a point of checking on her periodically, bringing her fresh tea and engaging in brief, friendly conversation. Other passengers smiled at her as they passed on the way to the lavatory. A young girl, perhaps 8 or 9, stopped by her seat and whispered, "My mom said you were really brave," before dashing back to her own row, giggling. Not all interactions were positive, though. A businessman in his 50s deliberately avoided eye contact when passing her seat, and Jasmine overheard snippets of conversation from a group of passengers who felt the entire incident had been blown out of proportion. Delay our flight just because his daughter could have handled it after we landed. Special treatment, if you ask me. These comments stung, making Jasmine question again whether she'd done the right thing. The burden of always having to consider how your actions might be perceived by others, a burden that Diana Montgomery had likely never experienced, weighed heavily on her. Jasmine spent the flight alternating between reading her textbook, watching a documentary about the history of British aviation, and dozing fitfully. Despite the positive outcome, the confrontation with Diana had left her emotionally drained. The adrenaline crash was real, her body aching with tension she hadn't realized she'd been holding. As the plane began its descent into Heathrow, Jasmine gazed out the window at the patchwork of green fields and winding rivers below. London, a new city, a new adventure. The incident with Diana already felt distant, like something that had happened to someone else. But the story did not end when the plane touched down at Heathrow. In the age of social media and instant information, actions have consequences that travel much faster than any subsonic jet. The travel journalist who had witnessed the entire event from row 3, Luis Hernandez, was not just any passenger. He was a freelance writer and the author of a popular travel blog called The Global Observer, known for its incisive commentary on the airline industry and passenger etiquette. He had recorded a brief, shaky video of the captain's confrontation with the Montgomerys, capturing the audio of the final stunning reveal. He spent the flight composing a blog post. He didn't name Jasmine, referring to her only as a poised young engineering student. He didn't even name the captain, simply calling him a credit to his uniform. But he described Diana Montgomery's behavior in meticulous, damning detail, from the sneering comments at the gate to the shoves on the jet bridge to her entitled shrieking in the first-class cabin. He titled the post "Entitlement at 35,000 feet, How a First-Class Passenger Got Ejected by the Captain and His Daughter." He posted it upon landing. By the time Jasmine had cleared customs, it was already starting to go viral. People shared it on Twitter, on Facebook, on industry forums. The video clip, blurry as it was undeniable. Diana's screeching, "Do you have any idea who I am?" became an instant meme. Not all the responses were positive, however. A vocal minority online questioned whether the captain had abused his authority to protect his daughter. "Nepotism in the skies," one commenter wrote. Would he have done the same for a random passenger, hatch captain privilege? These dissenting voices were quickly drowned out by the majority who saw justice being served, but they added another layer of complexity to the unfolding story. Back in New York, the Montgomerys' ordeal was just unfolding. Being escorted off a plane by security meant they were now on an internal transatlantic airways watch list. They were rebooked on a flight the next day, but not in first class. They were given 2 middle seats in the last row of economy right next to the lavatories, a subtle, brutal message from the airline's operations department. But their real problems began when Luis Hernandez's blog post exploded. It turned out that Diana Montgomery was not just a wealthy spouse. She was a board member and major brand ambassador for a high-end lifestyle company called Elevate a Brand that built its entire public image on inclusivity, mindfulness, and authentic living. They sold $1,000 yoga pants and sponsored charity galas for underprivileged youth. Within 48 hours, Elevate's social media accounts were inundated. Thousands of comments referencing the captain's daughter story flooded their posts. Hashtag Flight Justice and hashtag Captain's Daughter started trending. The hypocrisy was too glaring to ignore. A woman who represented a brand of inclusivity had been exposed for her racist and classist behavior in the most public way imaginable. The corporation scrambled to do damage control. A crisis PR team was activated. Their first move was to issue a vague statement about investigating an incident involving a board member. It was corporate speak for, "We're hoping this blows over." Diana tried desperately to gain control of the narrative. She issued a statement through a hastily hired PR firm claiming she had been unfairly targeted and that the video didn't show the whole story. She emphasized her charitable work and painted herself as the victim of a social media pile-on. But her efforts only fanned the flames as more witnesses from the flight came forward with their accounts. It didn't. Luis Hernandez wrote a follow-up piece this time connecting Diana Montgomery directly to Elevate, questioning how their brand could possibly stand by her actions. Major news outlets picked up the story. The incident on Flight A350 was no longer just a travel blog anecdote. It was a national news story about corporate hypocrisy and karmic justice. Not everyone agreed with the public shaming. Several op-eds appeared arguing that the punishment was disproportionate to the crime, that cancel culture had gone too far. "Yes, she behaved badly," wrote one columnist, "but does one moment of poor behavior warrant the destruction of a career?" These voices were a minority, but they were persistent, adding nuance to what might otherwise have been a simple story of comeuppance. The pressure on Elevate became immense. Their stock took a small but noticeable dip. Facing a full-blown brand catastrophe, the board convened an emergency meeting. The outcome was swift and merciless. Diana Montgomery was asked to resign from the board effective immediately. Her lucrative brand ambassador contract was terminated, citing a morality clause she had likely never read. In a single week, the world of privilege and adoration she had so carefully constructed had been utterly dismantled, all because she couldn't stand the sight of a young black woman in a priority boarding line. Even her personal life began to unravel. Richard, who had been publicly and professionally humiliated, was finally forced to confront the reality of his wife's toxic nature. The incident on the plane was not an isolated event, but the public culmination of decades of private bullying and arrogance he had silently enabled. In private therapy sessions, Richard began to articulate the complex web of emotions that had kept him bound to Diana for 20 years. Fear, complicity, and a deep-seated belief that her confidence somehow compensated for his own sense of inadequacy. "I've spent 2 decades being her apologist," he admitted to his therapist. "Making excuses, smoothing things over. I didn't realize I was becoming as bad as she was." The foundation of their marriage, already brittle, cracked under the strain. Richard moved out of their Upper East Side penthouse, taking only his personal belongings and leaving Diana alone with her designer furnishings and empty social calendar. The hard karma Diana experienced wasn't just being kicked off a flight. It was the complete and total demolition of her public identity, the stripping away of the status and respect she valued above all else. She had tried to make Jasmine feel small and powerless, and in the end, she had become the small and powerless one herself, a pariah in the very circles she once ruled. The London air greeted Jasmine with its characteristic blend of dampness and possibility as she stepped out of Heathrow Airport. The sky was a watercolor wash of grays and blues, threatening rain but holding it at bay for now. She took a deep breath, relishing the subtle differences in the atmosphere, the faint hints of diesel-wet stone and centuries of history. Her father had arranged for a car service to take her to her student accommodation in South Kensington. The driver, an elderly Jamaican man named Mr. Palmer, greeted her with a warm smile and took her luggage. "First time in London, miss?" he asked, his accent a musical blend of Caribbean cadences and British precision. Yes, Jasmine replied. I'm here for a semester abroad at Imperial. Ah, a scholar. Mr. Palmer's eyes crinkled with her accommodation was a renovated townhouse on a quiet, tree-lined street. Her room was small but elegant with a bay window overlooking a private garden. As Mr. Palmer helped bring in her luggage, her phone pinged with a flurry of notifications. 10 missed calls from her mother, 27 text messages from friends, and an email from Luis Hernandez requesting an interview with the aerospace student at the center of the Flight A350 incident. Jasmine's stomach dropped. She had hoped to leave the drama behind in New York, but it seemed to have followed her across the Atlantic. She quickly called her mother, who answered on the first ring. Jasmine, are you okay? Your father told me what happened, and now it's all over the internet. I'm fine, Mom, Jasmine assured her. Really, Dad handled it beautifully. I'm at my accommodation now, safe and sound. I've been getting calls from friends, from family, even reporters. Everyone wants to know what happened. Your aunt saw it on the morning news. The morning news, Jasmine echoed, disbelief coloring her voice. It can't be that big a story. Oh, sweetheart, it is. There's video. Someone on the plane recorded the whole thing when your dad confronted that woman. After calming her mother, Jasmine finally had a moment to assess the online situation. She opened Twitter to find #captain's daughter trending. The blurry video from the plane had over 2 million views. Screenshots of Luis's blog post were being shared with additional commentary. This is how you handle entitled racists and Captain of the Year. But there were also more troubling comments. A smaller but vocal contingent was questioning Captain Wilson's actions. Abuse of power much? Would he have deplaned a passenger for anyone else's daughter? 2 sides to every story. We only have the captain's kid's version. These comments made Jasmine's chest tighten. Her father had acted professionally enforcing airline policy, but the insinuation that he'd abused his authority stung. She scrolled through her text messages. Friends from MIT were sending supportive messages, mixed with disbelief. OMG, Jazz, was that you? Are you okay? That woman got exactly what she deserved. Your dad is an absolute legend. Jasmine felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication, yes, but also a strange sense of exposure. She had never sought the spotlight, especially not for something like this. She was here to study advanced propulsion systems, not to become a viral sensation. She drafted a polite but firm response to Luis Hernandez declining his interview request. While I appreciate your interest, I prefer to focus on my studies rather than revisiting an unfortunate incident. Thank you for your understanding. As the evening wore on, Jasmine unpacked and organized her room, trying to establish a sense of normalcy. She arranged her textbooks on the small desk, hung up her clothes, and placed a framed photo of her family on the nightstand. It was a picture from her high school graduation, her father in his captain's uniform, her mother in an elegant blue dress, and Jasmine in the middle beaming with pride. They looked happy, united, strong. She ran her finger over the glass, smiling at the memory. Then her phone rang again. It was her father. Hey, Dad. Hi, Jazz Bear. Settled in? Okay? Yes, all good. Except for the fact that I seem to have become internet famous. Michael sighed. I know. I'm sorry about that. I didn't expect someone to record it. It's okay. I'm just hoping it dies down quickly. I don't want to be known as the captain's daughter for my entire semester. She hesitated. Dad, some people are saying you abused your authority, that you only did it because I'm your daughter. There was a long pause. Would it have been better if I'd ignored it? Let her get away with behavior that violated our policies and hurt my own child? Sometimes doing the right thing means opening yourself to criticism. I guess Jasmine said, not entirely convinced. I just never wanted this to become such a big deal. Speaking of big deals, have you seen what's happening with Diana Montgomery? Michael asked, changing the subject slightly. I've heard rumors. Apparently her company isn't too happy with her right now. That's an understatement. She's trending for all the wrong reasons. There was a pause. Do you feel bad for her, Michael? Asked, his voice carefully neutral. Jasmine considered the question. I don't feel joy in her suffering, she said finally. But I don't feel responsible for it either. She made choices. She's facing consequences. That's my girl, Michael said, and Jasmine could hear the smile in his voice. Always the thoughtful one. The next morning, Jasmine attended her orientation at Imperial College. The engineering building was a marvel of modern design, all glass steel and natural light. As she found her way to the welcome session, she couldn't help but notice the whispers and glances following her. Is that her? The one from the plane? I think so. My cousin shared the video. Jasmine kept her head high and her expression neutral. She would not let this define her. She was here to learn to grow to become the best aerospace engineer she could be. The incident with Diana Montgomery was already in her past, a footnote in her journey. But as the day progressed, it became clear that escaping her newfound notoriety would not be so simple. During the department tour, Professor Winters, the head of the Aerospace Engineering Department, approached her. Miss Wilson, he said, extending his hand. A pleasure to have you with us. I've heard great things about your work at MIT. Thank you, sir, Jasmine replied, relieved that he seemed to know her for her academic record. And I must say, he added in a lower voice, your composure in that viral video was remarkable. My wife showed it to me last night. You handled yourself with exceptional dignity. Jasmine's heart sank a little. Even her professors had seen it. Thank you, she said simply. I'd prefer to focus on my studies while I'm here. Professor Winters nodded approvingly. Of course. And we're delighted to have a student of your caliber regardless of your newfound celebrity. As the orientation week progressed, Jasmine gradually found her rhythm. She made a few friends, other international students who either hadn't seen the video or were polite enough not to mention it. She explored the campus, located the best spots for quiet study, and began to feel at home. Then came the email from Transatlantic Airways Engineering Division. Dear Miss Wilson, it read, we were impressed by your academic record and your recent application for our summer internship program. We would be delighted to interview you at your convenience. Please note that this invitation is based solely on your qualifications and achievements at MIT, not on any other circumstances. Jasmine read the email twice, her heart pounding. She had applied for this internship months ago, never expecting to hear back so quickly. Was this a genuine offer, or was it somehow connected to the incident? The careful wording of the last sentence suggested they were aware of the viral story, but wanted to distance the internship opportunity from it. Another voice inside her whispered, what if they were only interviewing her because of who her father was? What if this was favoritism, not recognition of her abilities? After careful consideration, Jasmine decided to accept the interview. Whatever their initial motivation, this was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. Transatlantic Airways had one of the most advanced engineering divisions in the industry, and a summer internship there would be invaluable for her career. She would prove herself on her own merits, making it impossible for anyone to claim she hadn't earned her place. Meanwhile, back in New York, Diana Montgomery's world continued to implode. The morning after being deplaned, she had awakened to find herself the subject of a vicious social media pile-on. Her name was everywhere, always accompanied by words like racist, entitled, and Karen. She'd tried to regain control of the narrative, issuing a carefully worded statement through a PR firm. While I regret the unfortunate misunderstanding on Transatlantic Airways Flight A350, I believe the incident has been grossly mischaracterized on social media. I have dedicated my life to promoting inclusion and wellness through Elevate, and I will continue that important work. I ask for privacy during this difficult time. The statement only fueled the fire. The comments sections exploded with fury at her refusal to take responsibility. Non-apology started trending alongside her name. Elevate's board called an emergency meeting. Diana attended virtually, still in New York, her face drawn and pale on the Zoom screen. Diana, the chairperson, began, "I'll be direct. The board has voted unanimously to request your resignation. Your behavior on that flight, as captured in that video, is fundamentally incompatible with our brand values." "It was taken out of context," Diana protested weakly. "I was provoked. You don't understand." "The context is quite clear," another board member interrupted. "We've all seen the video, we've all read the blog post, and frankly, the public reaction has been brutal. Our stock is down. Our social media is flooded with negative comments. Major retailers are expressing concerns about continuing to carry our products. But I've been with this company since the beginning. I've raised millions for our charitable foundation, and we appreciate those contributions," the chairperson said, her voice softening slightly. "But this isn't just about one incident. It's about what that incident revealed about your character. We cannot have someone representing our brand who treats others with such contempt." Not everyone on the board agreed. One older member spoke up. "I think we're overreacting to a Twitter mob. Diana's been with us for 10 years. She deserves the chance to make amends." "Make amends," how another board member challenged. "She's had multiple opportunities to apologize sincerely and hasn't done so. Meanwhile, we're bleeding market share." The dissenter fell silent. The decision stood. The termination was effective immediately. Diana's company email was disabled before the Zoom call even ended. Her page was removed from the corporate website within the hour. A terse press release announced her departure to pursue other opportunities, a transparent corporate euphemism that fooled no one. Her phone stopped ringing. Friends who had eagerly accepted her invitations to exclusive parties and charity galas suddenly couldn't find time to meet for coffee. Her social media accounts, once filled with fawning comments, became cesspools of vitriol, forcing her to make everything private. And at home, Richard had begun sleeping in the guest room. The wall of silence between them grew thicker each day. The incident on the plane had forced him to see his wife clearly for perhaps the first time in their marriage. What he saw disturbed him deeply. In therapy, he began to unpack the patterns of their relationship. "I always made excuses for her," he admitted. "I told myself it was just her being particular, having high standards. But watching her treat that young woman that way, seeing it through the eyes of strangers, I realized I've been enabling her behavior for years. The karmic wheel had turned full circle." Diana Montgomery, who had tried to make Jasmine Wilson feel small and unwelcome, now found herself shrinking in every aspect of her life, unwelcome in the very spaces she had once dominated. 6 months had passed, and the London air had traded the mildness of late summer for the sharp, invigorating chill of winter. The incident on Flight A350 had receded, becoming not a scar, but a strange foundational memory, like a turbulent takeoff that gives way to a smooth and breathtaking flight. Jasmine's semester abroad was more than just an academic success. It was a period of profound self-discovery. She navigated the bustling tube, found her favorite quiet bookshops in Notting Hill, and fell into a comfortable rhythm of study sessions and weekend explorations with new friends who knew her only as the brilliant, funny woman from America, not as the subject of a viral news story. Still, there were moments when the shadow of the incident reappeared. Once, in a fluid dynamics seminar, a visiting professor had made a snide comment about students who get special treatment because of family connections. It was vague enough that others might not have caught the reference, but Jasmine felt the barb distinctly, her cheeks burning as she kept her eyes fixed on her notes. The constant need to prove herself to be beyond reproach was exhausting in ways her white classmates would never understand. Her studies in advanced aeronautics at Imperial College were challenging and exhilarating. She felt her world and her understanding of it expanding with each lecture. Her research project on microturbulence in composite wing structures had caught the attention of faculty members who were impressed by her innovative approach to reducing drag without compromising structural integrity. Professor Winters had become something of a mentor, recognizing her exceptional talent for fluid dynamics and encouraging her to pursue original research. "You have a remarkable ability to visualize airflow patterns," he told her during a project review. "It's not just mathematical for you. You see it, don't you?" Jasmine smiled. "My father says the same thing. When I was little, I used to watch smoke trails in wind tunnels for hours. Other kids had teddy bears. I had aerodynamic models." The pinnacle of her semester came not in a classroom, but in the form of an email with a Transatlantic Airways letterhead. It was a formal offer for a summer internship in their Heathrow Engineering and Maintenance Division. A wave of pure, unadulterated triumph washed over her. She had earned it with her grades, her interview, and her passion. The interview had been rigorous, 4 hours of technical questions, design challenges, and behavioral scenarios. When one interviewer had asked about her famous flight experience, Jasmine had politely redirected the conversation back to her research on fuel efficiency. She'd left the interview confident that she'd been evaluated on merit, not notoriety. The offer letter confirmed this. "Your innovative research on reducing drag through microsurface modifications and your exceptional analytical skills make you an ideal candidate for our team." It was a victory that was entirely her own, separate from her father's legacy, a fact that made it all the sweeter. Her weekly video calls with her father became a cherished ritual. They talked about everything: her projects, his flight schedules, the peculiar British obsession with tea. During one call in early December, Michael Wilson's expression turned serious, but in a way that signaled pride, not trouble. "Jazz Bear, something's happening at work. I thought you should know about it." He began the familiar cockpit instruments visible over his shoulder as he sat on the ground in New York. Corporate got flooded with messages after that blogger's story went viral. A lot of them were from other passengers, even crew on other airlines sharing similar experiences. He explained that the airline, seeing a potential PR victory and a genuine need for change, had launched a full-scale review of its conflict resolution policies. "They're calling it the Flight A350 Protocol." He said, a note of disbelief and pride in his voice. "It's a new training module for all cabin crew. It's about empowering them to identify and shut down harassment immediately without fear of repercussions from so-called high-value passengers. It gives them my full and explicit authority and the backing of the company to deplane anyone who threatens the dignity and safety of another passenger or crew member. Sophia is helping to lead the training sessions. She's a natural. Says she tells every new class that respect is as critical to a safe flight as fuel and a working engine." Jasmine felt a swell of emotion that caught her by surprise. This was the true consequence, the real karma. It wasn't just about one entitled woman facing her downfall. It was about creating a system where such behavior could no longer thrive. Her humiliating experience had been forged into a shield for others. "That's amazing, Dad," she managed to say. "It is," he agreed. "It's a good legacy for a bad day." He paused, then added more tentatively, "There have been some professional challenges, too. Some board members questioned my judgment, said I should have handled it differently." Jasmine's heart sank. "Are you in trouble?" "No, nothing like that," he assured her. "But it's been a conversation. Some think I overstepped. Others say I didn't go far enough. The company's public position has been supportive, especially since the protocol is getting good press. But behind closed doors, there are questions about whether I should have recused myself once I knew you were involved." "I'm sorry," Jasmine said, guilt washing over her. "I never meant to cause problems for you." "Don't apologize for standing up for yourself," Michael said firmly. "I've navigated worse turbulence than this. Besides, for every critic, I've had 3 colleagues thank me for setting a precedent, for making it clear that being a premium passenger doesn't mean you can behave however you want." Meanwhile, Diana Montgomery's descent continued. Richard had moved out of their Upper East Side apartment, taking only his clothes and personal items. His lawyer had reached out to hers to begin divorce proceedings. Diana found herself increasingly isolated. Her once bustling social calendar was now barren. The charities she had championed quietly suggested she might want to take a step back from public-facing roles. Her country club membership up for its annual renewal was mysteriously delayed in processing. Not everyone abandoned her. A small circle of friends stood by her, arguing that the social media outrage was disproportionate to her offense. "It's becoming a witch hunt," one longtime friend told her over lunch at a quiet restaurant far from their usual haunts. "What you did was wrong. Yes, but this level of punishment, it's excessive." Diana nodded gratefully, but the support did little to soften the blow of her public humiliation. Each day brought new indignities, being seated at a poor table in a restaurant where she'd once been treated like royalty, overhearing whispers as she walked down Madison Avenue, receiving the occasional hateful email from strangers. The financial implications were becoming dire as well. Without her elevated income, and with legal fees mounting, Diana was forced to reassess her lifestyle. The Hamptons house, once the venue for legendary summer galas, was quietly listed with a real estate agent. Diana's journey was not just external. In the long, empty hours of her newly quiet life, she was forced to confront truths about herself she had long suppressed. The woman in the viral video, shrill entitled, casually, "Cruel," was that really her? Had she always been that person? She began therapy not as a PR move. There was no public image left to rehabilitate, but out of genuine need. Her therapist, Dr. Abrams, didn't coddle her or validate her victimhood narrative. Instead, she asked hard questions that forced Diana to examine the roots of her behavior. When you saw Jasmine Wilson in that boarding line, what assumptions did you make about her? And why? You say you felt threatened. But what was the actual threat? A young woman standing quietly in line. Let's talk about your need to be seen as superior. Where does that come from? These sessions were painful, often leaving Diana in tears. But slowly, painfully, she began to recognize patterns in her behavior. A deep insecurity masked by aggression. A desperate need to be affirmed by excluding others. A lifetime of unchallenged prejudices. "My mother always said appearance was everything," Diana admitted in one particularly raw session. How you were perceived determined your value, and she was clear about who had value and who didn't. One day in late November, Diana sat in Dr. Abrams' office staring out the window at the gray New York skyline. "I've lost everything," she said quietly. "Have you?" Dr. Abrams asked. "Or have you lost the things that were preventing you from seeing yourself clearly?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, but resonant. A few weeks later, seeking refuge from the London drizzle, Jasmine was tucked into a worn armchair in a small cafe in South Kensington. The air smelled of roasted coffee beans and damp wool coats. As she worked on a paper on composite material, stress tolerances, her eyes drifted to a tablet left on an adjacent table. It was opened to a glossy online magazine, a purveyor of society gossip. A headline jumped out at her, accompanied by a somber photo of a grand, empty-looking mansion. Montgomery divorce. Finalized socialite sells Hamptons estate amidst financial collapse. Curiosity piqued. Jasmine leaned closer. The article was written in a tone of barely concealed glee, detailing the spectacular implosion of Diana Montgomery's world. The woman whose infamous airplane meltdown turned her into a viral villain has finalized her divorce from industrialist Richard Montgomery, the text read. Sources close to the couple claim Mr. Montgomery, long a background figure, cited irreconcilable differences following the humiliating incident that also led to Ms. Montgomery's ousting from the board of lifestyle brand Elevate. Stripped of her primary income and social standing, the former queen of the Hamptons charity circuit is now reportedly liquidating assets to cover mounting legal debts and a lifestyle she can no longer afford. Jasmine leaned back, the words settling not with a sense of victory but with a profound and quiet finality. There was no joy in reading of a life so thoroughly dismantled, but there was no pity either. It was simply the end of the story, the logical conclusion to a trajectory Diana had set in motion herself. It felt less like revenge and more like physics. An object propelled by arrogance traveling in a destructive direction had finally met an immovable force. The resulting crash was nothing more or less than the laws of the universe balancing themselves. She closed her laptop, the quiet hum of the cafe a comforting sound. A chapter was closed. Later that evening, Jasmine received an unexpected email. The sender's name made her pause. Richard Montgomery. With hesitation, she opened it, half expecting a misguided attempt to defend Diana or perhaps even blame Jasmine for what had happened. Instead, she found something entirely different. "Dear Miss Wilson," the email began. "You don't know me, though we had a brief unfortunate encounter on a flight to London 6 months ago. I was the silent, cowardly man who failed to stop my wife from harassing you. I am writing to offer my sincere apology, not on behalf of my ex-wife, who must make her own amends if she ever finds the courage, but for my own failure that day. I remained silent in the face of behavior I knew was wrong. My silence was complicity, as your father rightly pointed out. There is no excuse for what happened to you, nor for my inaction. I can only say that it has forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself and the life I've led. I am trying to become a better person, one who would have the courage to speak up next time. I don't expect or request forgiveness. I simply wanted you to know that your dignity in the face of such ugliness has had a profound impact on at least one witness. I wish you every success in your studies and your life. Respectfully, Richard Montgomery." Jasmine read the email twice, unsure how to feel. The apology seemed genuine, but it also reopened a wound she had thought healed. Her finger hovered over the delete button, then moved to reply. "Mr. Montgomery," she wrote, "thank you for your email. It took courage to reach out, and I appreciate your honesty. What happened that day was unfortunate, but it has led to positive changes in airline policy that will protect others. I hope you find peace in your new chapter. Best wishes, Jasmine Wilson." She sent it not out of obligation, but because she meant it. Forgiveness wasn't about absolving the other person. It was about freeing herself from the weight of resentment. She wasn't sure if she would ever respond to Diana if such an email came. Some hurts ran deeper than others. But she was learning that carrying anger only weighed down the carrier. Jasmine looked out her window at the London night, the street lamps glowing in the mist. There was a peace in knowing that consequences had found their rightful recipients, that justice in its way had been served. And there was a deeper satisfaction in knowing that her experience, painful as it was, had catalyzed real change. Somewhere out there, another young woman might board a flight and be treated with dignity because of what had happened on Flight A350. That more than any personal vindication was the legacy worth celebrating. As January rolled into February, the Flight A350 Protocol began to take shape within transatlantic airways. What had started as a PR response to a viral incident was evolving into something more substantial, a fundamental rethinking of how airlines handle passenger conflicts, particularly those with undertones of discrimination. Sofia Ramirez, now promoted to senior cabin crew trainer, was at the forefront of this evolution. Her experiences on that fateful flight had given her unique insights into how quickly situations could escalate, and how inadequate the traditional, separate, and diffuse approach could be when dealing with harassment. In a modern training facility at JFK, Sofia stood before a class of 30 new flight attendants, her posture confident, her voice clear and authoritative. The old approach was simple. Keep the plane moving, avoid delays, handle complaints later, she explained. But that approach had hidden costs. It often meant that victims of harassment were expected to endure mistreatment for the sake of operational efficiency. The Flight A350 Protocol changes that equation. On the screen behind her, a series of bullet points appeared. Identify harassment immediately. Document thoroughly. Protect the targeted passenger. Escalate to captain when necessary. hold aggressors accountable. Under this protocol, no passenger's dignity is sacrificed for on-time performance. Sophia continued, "We are empowered to recognize harassment, to call it what it is, and to take immediate action, even if that means deplaning a first-class passenger." The implementation hadn't been smooth sailing. There had been resistance from various quarters within the airline. The operations team worried about increased delays. The legal department fretted about potential lawsuits. The finance division calculated the cost of additional training and potential lost revenue from deplaned high-value customers. What happens when we deplane a CEO who claims they were just having a bad day? One skeptical trainer had asked during a planning session. What happens when we don't, and a video of discrimination goes viral? Sophia had countered. Which costs more? Captain Michael Wilson had become an unexpected advocate for these changes. Initially reluctant to use his newfound notoriety, he eventually recognized the power of his position to drive meaningful reform. He began speaking at industry events, sharing the story of Flight A350 as a case study in how airlines could better protect vulnerable passengers. At a conference in Chicago, Michael stood at a podium addressing a room full of airline executives and safety officers. "The incident involving my daughter was personal for me," obviously he acknowledged. "But it highlighted a broader issue. Our industry has inadvertently created a class system where certain passengers believe their premium tickets purchase not just extra leg room, but the right to mistreat others." He paused, looking around the room. "We can change that narrative. We can create an environment where respect is a non-negotiable condition of transport, just as essential as fastening your seatbelt or stowing your tray table." Not everyone was convinced. A senior executive from a competing airline raised his hand during the Q&A. "With respect, Captain Wilson, while your intentions are admirable, aren't you concerned that your protocol puts too much subjective power in the hands of crew members? What's to stop them from overreacting to minor disagreements?" "That's why training is essential," Michael replied. "We're not asking crew to police every interaction. We're giving them clear guidelines for identifying and addressing harassment. And we're backing them when they make those calls. The cost of occasionally inconveniencing a passenger pales in comparison to the cost of allowing harassment to continue unchecked." The impact began to spread beyond transatlantic airways. Other airlines, seeing the positive public reaction to the Flight A350 Protocol, began implementing similar policies. Trade publications ran articles with headlines like, "Is the Flight A350 Protocol the new gold standard in passenger relations?" and how one incident changed airline conflict resolution. There were holdouts, of course. Some airlines dismissed the protocol as a PR stunt. Others claimed their existing procedures were sufficient. But market forces were at work. Passengers began asking about harassment policies when booking flights. Social media campaigns urged travelers to fly with airlines that respect everyone. The pressure to adapt was building. Jasmine watched all of this unfold from London with a mixture of pride and amazement. What had begun as a horrible personal experience was transforming into an industry-wide movement. It was a validation that standing up for oneself could create ripples far beyond the immediate confrontation. The protocol faced its first major test when a prominent tech CEO was deplaned from a transatlantic airways flight after repeatedly making sexist comments to a female business traveler. The CEO threatened legal action, claiming he was just being friendly. But the airline stood firm, backed by the clear guidelines of the A350 Protocol. When video of the incident surfaced, complete with timestamps showing the flight attendant had followed proper procedure, public opinion sided overwhelmingly with the airline. The CEO eventually issued an apology, and his company announced a comprehensive review of its corporate culture. During her weekly call with her father in early March, Jasmine asked about the latest developments. "The protocol is going international," Michael reported. 3 European carriers have adopted versions of it. And you'll never guess who reached out to us. Who Luis Hernandez, the blogger. He wants to do a follow-up piece on how the protocol is changing the industry. He's calling it The lasting impact of Flight A350. Jasmine shook her head, smiling. It's strange to think that one awful moment could lead to so much change. That's often how progress works, Michael replied. It takes a spotlight on the problem before people are willing to address it. After they hung up, Jasmine checked her email and found an unexpected message from Imperial College's communications department. They wanted to interview her for the university magazine not about the viral incident, but about her research in fuel efficiency and her upcoming internship with Transatlantic Airways. The request included a note. While we understand you became known for an unfortunate incident on a flight last year, we are primarily interested in highlighting your academic achievements and your promising future in aerospace engineering. Jasmine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Finally, she was being recognized for her work, not just for being the captain's daughter. She accepted the interview request. The resulting article, titled Engineering Excellence: Jasmine Wilson's Innovative Approach to Fuel Efficiency, made no mention of Flight A350 or Diana Montgomery. It focused entirely on Jasmine's research, her academic journey, and her vision for the future of aviation technology. The accompanying photo showed her in a lab coat examining a complex engine component, her face lit with intellectual curiosity. Her research focused on microstructure modifications to wing surfaces that could reduce drag without compromising structural integrity. The potential fuel savings were modest, perhaps 2 to 3%. But in an industry where margins were tight and environmental concerns mounting, even small improvements could have significant impact. The challenge, she explained in the article, isn't just creating a more efficient wing. It's creating one that can be retrofitted to existing aircraft at a reasonable cost. The best engineering solution is worthless if it's not economically viable. Professor Winters sent her a congratulatory email after the article was published. This is just the beginning of your contribution to our field, he wrote. Your mind will take you much further than that viral video ever could. In April, as Jasmine's semester abroad neared its end, she received another email from Transatlantic Airways. This one wasn't about her internship, but was an invitation to speak at the formal launch of the fully implemented Flight A350 Protocol. Your perspective as the passenger whose experience inspired these changes would be invaluable, the email read. This would be an opportunity to help shape how airlines approach issues of harassment and discrimination moving forward. Jasmine sat with the invitation for several days, unsure how to respond. On one hand, she had been trying to move beyond the incident. On the other, here was a chance to help ensure that what happened to her wouldn't happen to others. After careful consideration, she accepted the invitation with one condition: she would speak not just as the passenger from Flight A350, but as an aerospace engineering student with insights into how technical and cultural systems interact within aviation. Meanwhile, back in New York, Diana Montgomery was slowly rebuilding her life from the ashes of her former existence. The divorce was finalized. The Hamptons house had been sold. She had moved into a modest, by her previous standards, apartment in Brooklyn, far from her former Upper East Side social circle. Therapy continued, painful but necessary. Dr. Abrams had convinced her to join a community service program, volunteering at a literacy center in a predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhood. At first, Diana had gone reluctantly, viewing it as a form of penance. But gradually, something unexpected happened. She began to form real connections with the children she tutored. Connections based not on social standing or appearance, but on genuine human interaction. One afternoon, as she helped a young girl named Zoe with her reading, Diana had a moment of clarity. Zoe reminded her of Jasmine Wilson, the same quiet dignity, the same sharp intelligence. If they had met in any other context, if Diana had been any other person, she might have recognized these qualities immediately in Jasmine. Instead, she had seen only what her prejudice allowed her to see: a threat to her perceived status. The realization was both humbling and illuminating. That evening, Diana sat down at her computer and began typing. The words that had eluded her for months finally came. "Dear Miss Wilson," she wrote, You don't know me, or rather you know only the worst version of me captured on what was arguably the most shameful day of my life. I am Diana Montgomery, the woman who harassed you on Flight A350. There is no excuse for my behavior that day. None. I won't insult you by attempting to explain or justify it. What I did was wrong. It was cruel, prejudiced, and entirely unprovoked. I don't expect your forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that the consequences of that day, painful as they've been for me, have forced me to confront truths about myself that I had successfully avoided for decades. I am now in therapy working to understand and address the prejudices that led to my behavior. I've lost my marriage, my career, my home, and my social standing. But perhaps most importantly, I've lost the delusion that I was a good person. It turns out that being a good person requires more than donating to charities and attending galas. It requires treating every human being with dignity, something I failed to do for you. I don't know if you'll ever read this, and I understand if you choose to delete it unread. But I needed to write it if only to acknowledge the harm I caused and to assure you that your dignity in the face of my cruelty has had a profound impact on at least one person. I am trying to become better. With sincere regrets, Diana Montgomery. She hovered over the send button for a long time before finally clicking it. Then she closed her laptop and cried not for what she had lost, but for what she had been. The email arrived in Jasmine's inbox late one evening as she was preparing for final exams. She recognized the sender's name immediately and felt a surge of complex emotions. Anger, curiosity, apprehension. She almost deleted it unread, but then hesitated. Whatever Diana had to say, perhaps it was worth hearing. She opened the email and read it carefully. Then she read it again. The words seemed genuine, the remorse real. There was no attempt to minimize the offense or to paint Diana as the victim. Jasmine didn't reply immediately. She needed time to process to decide if a response was even warranted. She decided to sleep on it. The next morning she forwarded the email to her father with a simple question. "What do you think?" His response came quickly. "That's for you to decide. Jazbear, whatever you choose to respond or not to forgive or not, I support you. But remember, forgiveness isn't about them. It's about giving yourself permission to move on." Jasmine nodded to herself. Her father, as always, had cut to the heart of the matter. She began composing a reply. "Ms. Montgomery," she wrote, "thank you for your email. I appreciate the difficulty of writing it and the honesty with which you've addressed your actions. I won't pretend the incident didn't affect me. It did. Being humiliated in public, being made to feel less than human because of my skin color, these experiences leave marks. But they don't define me, just as your worst moment doesn't have to define you. I accept your apology in the spirit in which it was offered. I don't harbor anger toward you. In fact, I'm somewhat grateful for the unexpected positive changes that have emerged from that difficult day, not just for me, but for many passengers who will benefit from the new protocol named after our flight. I wish you well on your journey of self-reflection and growth. We all have work to do in creating a more just and equitable world. Sincerely, Jasmine Wilson." She sent the email feeling a sense of closure. The exchange wouldn't undo what had happened, but it felt like the proper conclusion to a chapter that had already dragged on too long. In May, just before the end of her semester, Jasmine traveled to New York for the official launch of the Flight A350 Protocol. The event was held in a conference room at Transatlantic Airways headquarters, with journalists, airline executives, and crew members in attendance. Captain Wilson introduced his daughter with undisguised pride. "Jasmine isn't just the passenger whose experience inspired these changes," he told the audience. "She's an exceptional aerospace engineering student who understands better than most the complex interplay of technical and human systems that make aviation work." I'm honored to introduce her not just as my daughter but as a future leader in our industry." Jasmine approached the podium nervous but composed. She wore a professional Navy suit, her silver Aerospace pin gleaming on her lapel. "Thank you," she began. "When I boarded Flight A350 6 months ago, I was just a student heading to a semester abroad. I never expected to become the catalyst for an industry-wide policy shift. But sometimes the most meaningful changes begin with difficult moments. The Flight A350 Protocol isn't just about protecting passengers from harassment. It's about recognizing that true safety encompasses more than physical security. It includes dignity, respect, and the right to travel without fear of discrimination. As an engineering student, I'm trained to think about structural integrity, the ability of a system to withstand stress without failing. The best aircraft are designed not just to fly under ideal conditions, but to remain stable through turbulence and unexpected challenges. Similarly, the best passenger policies should create an environment that remains stable and secure for everyone, even when human behavior introduces unexpected turbulence. That's what the Flight A350 Protocol aims to achieve. I'm proud to have played a small role in this evolution, and I look forward to contributing to the future of aviation in my own way, designing more efficient, safer aircraft that will carry the next generation of travelers to their destinations with both physical security and personal dignity intact." The applause was warm and sustained. Journalists asked thoughtful questions, focusing not on the viral incident but on the protocol's implementation and Jasmine's perspective as both an engineering student and the passenger whose experience had inspired the changes. Not all the coverage was positive. One industry blog ran a piece questioning whether the protocol went too far, potentially giving crews too much subjective power. Another opinion column suggested that while the protocol's aims were admirable, it might lead to increased boarding delays and higher ticket prices. These dissenting voices didn't dampen the overall enthusiasm for the changes, but they did highlight the challenges that remained in fully transforming an industry built on hierarchical service models. After the event, Sophia approached Jasmine with a warm smile. "You've started something important," she said. "I've been training crew members for weeks now, and the response has been incredible. People are relieved to have clear guidelines to know they'll be backed up when they intervene in harassment situations." "I'm glad something positive came from it all," Jasmine replied. "More than you know," Sophia assured her. 3 other airlines have already reached out about implementing similar protocols. This could change the entire industry's approach to passenger dignity. As Jasmine prepared to return to London for her final exams, she reflected on the strange journey that had begun with a simple priority boarding line. An entitled woman's cruelty had led to pain, yes, but also to growth change and even redemption. It wasn't the story she would have chosen for herself, but it was a story with meaning, one that might make air travel a little more humane for countless passengers to come. And as for Diana Montgomery, the last Jasmine had heard, she was continuing therapy and volunteer work. Her Instagram, once filled with luxury travel and charity galas, now occasionally featured photos from the Literacy Center, Diana sitting with children helping them read her face devoid of makeup, but somehow more authentic than it had ever been in her glossy, curated past. It wasn't exactly a happy ending, but perhaps it was the beginning of a more honest life. The final weeks of Jasmine's semester abroad passed in a blur of exams, farewell gatherings, and bittersweet goodbyes. Her time at Imperial College had transformed her not just academically but personally. She had arrived as a young woman seeking academic advancement and was leaving as a confident engineer with a clearer vision of her future. Professor Winters met with her on her last day reviewing her final project on advanced materials for fuel-efficient aircraft design. "Exceptional work, Miss Wilson," he said, his usual reserve giving way to genuine enthusiasm. "Your analysis of composite integrity under extreme temperature variations is particularly impressive." "Thank you, sir," Jasmine replied. "I've learned so much here." "And we've learned from you," he said, surprising her. "Your resilience in the face of that unpleasantness early in your stay here, your ability to focus on your work despite unwanted attention. These are qualities that will serve you well in any career. He handed her an envelope. My letter of recommendation for your graduate studies. I've also taken the liberty of introducing you to colleagues at Cambridge and ETH Zurich. Your talent should not go unrecognized. As Jasmine packed her belongings, carefully wrapping the small souvenirs she'd collected, a miniature Big Ben, a stone from the banks of the Thames, a ticket stub from her first West End show, her phone rang. It was her father. "Hey, Dad." "Hi, Jazz Bear." "All packed." "Almost. I can't believe it's been 6 months already. Time flies," he agreed, then paused. "Listen, I have news. I won't be able to meet you at JFK tomorrow." Jasmine felt a pang of disappointment. She had been looking forward to seeing her father after so long. "Oh, are you on a flight?" "Not exactly," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I'm in London. Just landed at Heathrow. I thought I'd surprise you, fly home together tomorrow." Jasmine's face broke into a wide smile. "Really, Dad? That's amazing. I figured after everything, it would be nice to make the return journey together. Plus, I've never seen your London life. Thought you might show me around before we leave." That evening, Jasmine took her father on a walking tour of her London, the small cafe where she studied the path along the Thames. She jogged each morning the bookshop where she'd found rare engineering texts. They ended at a riverside pub, sharing a meal and catching up face-to-face after months of video calls. "You seem different," Michael observed, studying his daughter across the table. "More centered somehow." Jasmine considered this. "I think I am. Everything that happened, the incident, the viral video, the protocol, it forced me to define myself, to decide who I am apart from what others see or assume." "And who is that?" he asked softly. She touched the silver Aerospace pin on her lapel, a gift from him that had accompanied her through this entire journey. "I'm an engineer," she said simply. "I'm someone who builds things, solves problems, makes systems work better. That's who I've always been even before I had the words for it." Michael nodded, his eyes bright with pride, and something else, a recognition perhaps of his daughter's full emergence into adulthood. "That's who you are," he agreed. "And a damn good one." The flight home the next day was on a different airline, British Airways, rather than Transatlantic Airways. Jasmine couldn't help but notice the differences in protocol, the way the flight attendants handled boarding, the subtle hierarchy reinforced by their procedures. It made her appreciate even more the changes that had been implemented in the wake of her experience. As they settled into their seats, premium economy, not first class, a flight attendant approached, recognizing Captain Wilson from industry events. "Captain," she said, extending her hand, "it's an honor to have you on board. I attended your presentation on the Flight A350 Protocol last month. It was inspiring." Michael shook her hand warmly. "Thank you. But the real inspiration was my daughter." He gestured to Jasmine. "This is Jasmine Wilson." The flight attendant's eyes widened slightly. The Jasmine Wilson. The engineering student. She turned to Jasmine with newfound respect. "Your story has changed how many of us approach passenger conflicts. Thank you for your courage." Jasmine felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I just stood my ground," she said simply. "Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do," the flight attendant replied, before moving on to other passengers. The summer internship at Transatlantic Airways Engineering Division lived up to all of Jasmine's expectations and more. Based at their Heathrow facility, she worked alongside experienced engineers contributing to projects ranging from cabin pressurization systems to fuel efficiency algorithms. Her supervisor, Dr. Elena Vasquez, quickly recognized Jasmine's exceptional talent for identifying potential failure points in complex systems. "You have an unusually integrated perspective," she told Jasmine during a performance review. Most young engineers focus either on theoretical models or practical applications, but you move seamlessly between the two. I've had some practice identifying stress points in systems, Jasmine replied with a small smile, thinking of Diana Montgomery and the cracks her behavior had revealed in airline passenger protocols. Dr. Vasquez nodded, understanding the reference. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from experiencing a system's failures firsthand. During her internship, Jasmine crossed paths with Sofia Ramirez, who was in London conducting training sessions for the international implementation of the Flight A350 Protocol. They met for coffee near the Thames, two women whose lives had been unexpectedly intertwined by a single confrontation. "How are the trainings going?" Jasmine asked. "Better than we anticipated," Sofia replied. There was some initial pushback concerns about delays about offending high-status passengers, but those arguments don't hold up well against the video evidence of what happened on our flight. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "You know, in 15 years of flying, I've witnessed countless incidents like yours. Usually they happen with no cameras rolling, no famous blogger documenting it, no captain's daughter as the target. They just happen and we move on. It takes a perfect storm like Flight A350 to finally force change." "Do you think it will last?" Jasmine asked. "The protocol, I mean, once the story fades from memory." Sofia nodded confidently. "It will, because it's not just a PR move anymore. It's become part of our operational DNA. New flight attendants are being trained in these procedures from day one. They don't know any other way to handle these situations." As July turned to August, Jasmine received yet another email from Transatlantic Airways, this time from the chief engineering officer himself. It was an invitation to extend her internship into a part-time position she could maintain while completing her senior year at MIT with a guaranteed full-time offer upon graduation. "Your contributions to our fuel efficiency initiatives have already saved the airline an estimated $2.3 million annually," the email noted. "We consider you an investment in our future." Jasmine shared the news with her father during their weekly call. "That's incredible, Jazz," he said, his face beaming with pride on the video screen. "Though I'm not surprised. You've always been brilliant." "Thanks, Dad," she said, then hesitated. "I've been thinking about something else, too. The pilot training program." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You want to fly? I want to understand every aspect of aircraft, not just how they're built, but how they're operated. I think being a pilot, even if only for a few years, would make me a better engineer." Michael nodded slowly. "It would. And you'd be an exceptional pilot. You've had the feel for it since you were a kid." "I wouldn't be following in your footsteps," she clarified quickly. "It would be my own path, engineering first, flying second." "I know that," he assured her, "and I'd be proud either way." As the summer internship drew to a close, Jasmine took one last walk through London, the city that had witnessed her transformation from a student shaken by discrimination to a young professional confident in her abilities and clear in her purpose. She found herself at the same riverside spot where she'd stood on her first day in the city, watching planes descend toward Heathrow, their lights blinking steadily against the darkening sky. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. It wasn't words at first, but a photo. The image was breathtaking, taken from the flight deck of his aircraft at cruising altitude. It showed the deep, impossible blue of the upper atmosphere fading into the blackness of space above, with the gentle, brilliant curve of the earth stretching out below, wrapped in a thin, swirling blanket of clouds. A moment later, a line of text appeared beneath the photo. "Your office view next summer. Keep climbing. Keep. Love, Dad." A wide, genuine smile spread across Jasmine's face as tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude and hope. From that altitude, the world's divisions and prejudices seemed so small, so insignificant. That was her father's world, a world of vast horizons, of precision, of responsibility, of looking at the bigger picture. and now it was hers too. She was an aerospace engineer. She belonged up there in the boundless, unforgiving, and beautiful expanse of the sky. She would build things, fix things, and understand things that allowed humanity to slip the bonds of Earth and see that stunning, humbling view. Like her father, she knew that no matter the turbulence on the ground, the key was to stay calm, trust your instruments, and always, always fly with integrity. 3 years later, Jasmine Wilson stood at the podium of MIT's graduation ceremony, her doctoral robes flowing around her as she addressed her fellow graduates as the selected student speaker. Her silver aerospace pin, now joined by pilot's wings, gleamed against the dark fabric. "When I boarded a flight to London 4 years ago," she began, "I couldn't have imagined how a single act of discrimination would alter not just my path, but the policies of an entire industry." The Flight A350 Protocol, born from that difficult moment, has now been adopted by 27 airlines worldwide. It has changed how flight crews are trained, how conflicts are managed, and how passenger dignity is protected. She paused, looking out over the sea of faces. But the most profound lessons I learned weren't about aviation policy. They were about standing firm in the face of injustice, about the unexpected ways that maintaining your dignity can create ripples of change far beyond your own experience. And perhaps most importantly, about how systems, whether mechanical or human, can be redesigned when we identify their failure points. Behind her, Dr. Elena Vasquez from Transatlantic Airways and Professor Winters from Imperial College nodded in agreement. They had come to witness her graduation and to formalize a joint research position that would allow Jasmine to divide her time between engineering innovation and pilot duties, a unique role created specifically for her unique talents. As engineers, pilots, scientists, and citizens, we have the power and the responsibility to improve the systems we inhabit. Sometimes that means designing more efficient engines. Sometimes it means creating more equitable policies. Always it means recognizing that our technical expertise must serve human dignity. As she concluded her speech to thunderous applause, Jasmine caught her father's eye in the front row. Captain Michael Wilson, now the Director of Flight Operations for Transatlantic Airways, had tears in his eyes as he gave her a subtle thumbs up, their private signal of approval since her childhood science fair projects. Later that evening, at a small family celebration, her father presented her with a gift, a custom-designed captain's jacket with her name and 4 stripes embroidered on the shoulders alongside her aerospace engineering credentials. "For the woman who can fly the plane and rebuild the engine," he said with a proud smile. Jasmine hugged him tightly, overcome with emotion. In that embrace was everything gratitude for his unwavering support, pride in her accomplishments, and the knowledge that she had found her place in the world. That night, looking up at the star-filled sky from her parents' backyard, Jasmine reflected on the long, unexpected journey that had brought her here. One moment of standing up for herself had rippled outward, changing not just her life, but the lives of countless others. It wasn't a path she would have chosen, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. The dignity with which she had faced that moment of discrimination had not just defined her character, it had helped reshape an industry. And as she prepared to take flight in her new dual role, she carried with her the most important lesson of all, that sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is simply refusing to be diminished. If this story moved you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. The person you choose to belittle on any given day might be more connected and capable than you could ever imagine. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage, dignity, and justice. Remember, standing up for yourself with grace can sometimes trigger an avalanche of positive change that extends far beyond your own experience.